In my previous life, when the kidnappers ran over, I saved my sister, Nancy, and got taken instead. 15 years later, my biological parents found me, but I never felt any love from them. The little master who had taken my place often framed me. Nancy would always walk arm in arm with him, looking at me with disdain, saying, "My only brother is Eric," as she wished I was killed by the adopted brother. Then, I opened my eyes and was back on the day the kidnappers came. 6-year-old Nancy looked panicked. "Brother, save me." This time, I didn't rush in like before. I calmly said, "Sis, see you in 15 years. Hurry. Grab that little boy. Don't let him run." Urgent cries filled the air. I suddenly realized I was sitting in a kid's go-kart. 6-year-old Nancy was running and crying. The scene was so familiar. I realized I had traveled back to the day I was kidnapped. Soon, the fierce old lady caught Nancy and headed towards a van across the street. "Brother, save me." Nancy was terrified. In my last life, I saw the old lady taking my sister away and immediately drove the go-kart into her. The old lady fell and Nancy broke free. I yelled, "Sis, get on." Nancy quickly got on the go-kart, but I was thrown off while turning. The furious old lady got up and caught me. Nancy, scared, didn't stop the go-kart and escaped unharmed, while I was kidnapped, starting a tragic life. "Brother, save me." Nancy's cries continued. The old lady and her accomplice had noticed me. No time to waste, I drove away. As I looked at the crying Nancy from a distance, I calmly said, "See you in 15 years, sis." After Nancy was kidnapped, my parents were devastated, posting her missing notices everywhere. But it was useless. Thinking back to the family that bought me, they lived so far from town. I wondered how Nancy would end up. Though my parents were heartbroken now, they'd forget, just like they did with me. They later adopted a son, showering him with love. Even after they found me, their real son, his place in the family was unshaken. Most absurdly, when the adopted son needed a kidney transplant, they begged me, their own son, to donate mine. So, nothing can't be replaced, not even parents or children. Time flew by, and it was almost a year since Nancy disappeared. I always told my parents how lonely I was and missed my sister. It made my mom cry every time. One day, she suggested to my dad, "Why don't we adopt a child?" I saw it coming, so when they told me their plan, I asked, "Can we adopt a sister? I want a sister to look after me." My parents were uneasy but didn't object. Since adopting a sister was my call, they took me to many orphanages. I wasn't satisfied with any girl I met. Then we visited a remote, run-down orphanage. After not finding anyone suitable, we were about to leave when chubby Larry suggested adopting a boy. He mentioned one who was polite, smart, and well-behaved. Tired from the search, Mom agreed to see him. When the boy came out, I was shocked. It was him, Eric, the boy my parents adored in my past life. He was surprised too. His polite smile changed to shock, blurting out, "What's going on?" We stared at each other. Mom asked Larry, "Is this the boy you mentioned?" Larry was a bit embarrassed. "Judy, sorry. Eric might be just excited to meet you." Eric quickly composed himself, becoming polite and cautious. "Hello, sir, ma'am. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be rude." Mom nodded, curious but asked some questions. Eric answered them all politely. After talking, it was clear my mom liked him. My dad seemed pleased too. But I had the final say as Jason. "Jason, can we bring this boy home?" Mom asked gently. "No." Eric's face turned pale. He looked at me, shocked and anxious, wanting to say something but held back. Mom was surprised by my firmness. She tried to convince me, having a brother isn't bad. You could build models and play games together. No. Seeing my resolve, Mom sighed. "Sorry, Larry, we can't adopt this boy." "It's okay, Judy." Larry nodded in understanding. But no. Just then, Eric suddenly broke down and yelled out, "Why is this happening, Mom? It's me, Eric. Dad, don't you recognize me?" His parents were startled and confused, looking at the boy in front of them, not understanding what was going on. Eric rushed over and held his mom tightly, tears streaming down his face, as if afraid she might disappear in the next second. Mom, I've been waiting here for you and Dad for so long. Take me home. I don't want to stay here another day. Where's my sister? Why didn't she come? His mom was freaked out by his strange words and pushed him away. What is wrong with you? Are you not right in the head? Eric paused and wiped his tears, explaining, No, Mom, I'm perfectly clear-headed. Last life, you picked me up from here. Except for me, no one understood what he was talking about. His parents looked completely shocked. They probably didn't expect Larry to recommend someone mentally unstable. Larry looked embarrassed and uncomfortable, quickly calling someone to take Eric away. Eric panicked and lashed out, kicking and screaming hysterically. No, I won't go. I want to go home with Mom and Dad. Get away. Get away. I'm the rightful heir of a group. That guy's a fake. Mom, I'm your real son. The two attendants lifted Eric up and took him away like he was a little chick. Even after a long while, you could still hear his heartbreaking screams from the yard. My mom, still shaken, grabbed my hand and walked out briskly. Jason, let's go. We shouldn't stay here. This place is crazy. In my last life, I was the apple of my mom's eye. Now I'm just a lunatic in her eyes. I can't stand this complete change of attitude, let alone Eric. Words kill, you know? It took me 3 whole months, but I finally found Linda at a welfare home in a neighboring city. When the director led me to her, she was in the middle of a fight with some little boys. Her face was scratched, one eye bruised, and her arm was bleeding. Though beaten up, her eyes were fierce and defiant like a little she-wolf, refusing to back down. My eyes instantly teared up. In my past life, whenever other kids bullied me in the orphanage, she always stood up for me, even if it meant 1 against 10, even if she got beaten badly. Even if the director punished her by not letting her eat for 3 days, she always comforted me with a careless tone. Don't cry. I taught them a lesson for you, didn't I? But you got hurt so badly. Doesn't it hurt? This isn't a big deal. I'm a tough girl. Don't worry. I promise to protect you, and I will keep that promise. Her determined words still rang in my ears. Linda, it's my turn to protect you this time. When I told my parents I wanted to bring Linda home, they didn't understand. They likely heard about her antics from other kids at the welfare home. But I didn't care and insisted on it. They had no choice and finally agreed. And that's how 8-year-old Linda came home with me. Looking at the lavish living room, the luxurious crystal chandelier, and the plush Persian carpet, she seemed a bit uneasy and instinctively hid her tattered sleeves behind her back. Why did you guys adopt me? I led her to a room on the 2nd floor and drew open the heavy curtains. The floor-to-ceiling window was wide and bright. Sunlight filtered through a ginkgo tree outside, casting dappled patterns on the floor. I turned to her with a warm smile, because in this life, it's our turn to live well. She certainly didn't get it and looked at me, puzzled. Who's that? She asked, pointing at a photo on the bookshelf. It was a picture of Nancy holding a doll on her 6th birthday last year. No one, I replied, picking up the frame and tossing it into the trash without hesitation. I remember Nancy once telling me coldly that she would only ever recognize Eric as her brother. Fine. In this life, I don't need her as a sister either. After a while, Linda looked up at me again. Those black and white eyes of hers carried a hint of uncertainty and stubbornness. How long do you plan to keep me? 3 months or 6? I knew Linda had been given up for adoption twice before. One couple only wanted to foster her as a publicity stunt to boost their factory's brand awareness. With the media's enthusiastic coverage, they adopted Linda but then ignored her. She got beaten up by that couple's chubby son regularly. But to go to school and not be shamed as an orphan without parents, she endured it all at just 5 years old. Eventually, the beatings got worse, and the boy even pushed her down the stairs. When their factory went bankrupt, the couple decided to send Linda back to the orphanage. Before leaving, she couldn't take it anymore and got into a huge fight with the boy, leaving him bawling. From then on, Linda knew that to avoid getting bullied, fists were the only answer. About 6 months later, Linda was adopted again by a middle-aged couple who couldn't have kids. This time, she was somewhat lucky. Though they weren't well off, they treated her okay, at least not hurting her physically, and life wasn't too harsh daily. But the calm days didn't last. The wife got pregnant, and without much thought, the couple sent Linda back to the orphanage. After that, her hope for adoption died. She no longer hoped to be adopted and became increasingly aggressive, fighting often and being a loner. Until she met me at the orphanage, two isolated kids gradually became friends. I reflected on these memories and walked over to Linda. Not for 3 months, not for 6 months. You can stay in this home as long as you want, until you decide to leave, I told her sincerely. She kept looking at me, her dark sparkling eyes like stars in the night sky. It felt like ages before she finally spoke. Even though my parents were against bringing Linda back at first, the truth hurts rule quickly played out. No one knows better than me how smart Linda is. After just 3 piano lessons, she could play a whole pop song from memory. After 2 months of Go lessons, even the teacher wasn't a match for her. When it came to academics, by 3rd grade, she was already reading 5th grade math books. She never scored less than 100 in Chinese and English. Smiles started spreading on my parents' faces, especially when they'd hear Linda's teachers singing her praises. They started putting as much effort into Linda's upbringing as they did mine, signing her up for classes she was interested in, taking her to mingle with the upper crust, where she mingled seamlessly with her wealthy young peers. Linda was stunningly beautiful and a star student. Her personality was a bit proud, but still, she was amazing. Some big shots even started plotting to marry their sons into my family through her. Dad was happy but politely declined. After all, she was too young at the time. After that, my parents were even more serious about Linda's education. On top of that, they treated her just the same as their own son in daily life. Linda and I became as close as if we'd known each other forever. One day after school, a shadow suddenly darted onto the road, scaring driver Leo into swerving hard. Linda, quick on her feet, leaped over to shield me. With a loud bang, the car crashed into a roadside flower bed. Linda checked me over in a panic. "Are you okay?" I let out a sigh of relief, shaking my head. "I'm fine." Luckily, the car only had a cracked front, and the 3 of us were okay. Leo, pale with fear, angrily got out of the car, only to find a young boy standing there. "Larry the driver, it's me, Eric," the boy said, looking thrilled. "Hey, kid, do you know how dangerous that was? Where are your parents?" Larry asked sternly. Eric looked crushed. Seeing Linda and me inside the car, he asked, "Jason, how are you two together?" Linda turned her head curiously, asking me, "Who's that? Do you know him?" I shrugged it off. "No idea." Eric's face went pale as he shook his head frantically. "No way, how could this happen? Where's Nancy? Where did Nancy go?" Leo turned to me too. "Young master, is this your friend?" "No idea who he is. Let's just go," I said quickly. With that, Leo got back in the car and started it up. Eric panicked, pounding on the car window. "Jason, you can't go. I need to see my mom with you. Stop. Let me in." Feeling annoyed, I muttered, "What a crazy day." Ran into a lunatic. "Larry, tell the security not to let any crazies in when we get back." "Got it." The car sped away, and Eric desperately chased after us, shouting from behind. When we got home, I told my mom about what happened earlier. "Gosh, that was close. Nearly got into an accident." "Mom, do you think that kid was really a lunatic? How did he even find our home?" Mom must have been shaken too, angrily calling the director. The other side was apologizing profusely, promising they'd send someone to find Eric, and they'd take him away soon. With that, the matter was resolved. Soon after, there were some issues with our company's business in Europe. Dad planned to head there immediately. He hinted to Mom that it might be a long stay, maybe 2 or even 3 years, implying he wouldn't be coming back home anytime soon due to business. Thinking about that persistent Eric from before, I suggested without hesitation, "Mom, how about we move over with Dad?" Mom quickly agreed to the suggestion. Just 2 weeks later, our family flew to France together. Up in the sky, I quietly looked at the clouds below and waved a goodbye. "Bye-bye, Nancy, Eric. If fate allows, see you in 14 years. In those long, hard times, hang in there. Don't go getting into trouble or doing anything drastic." Grit your teeth. Live like ants in poverty, with no dignity. 'Cause, that's how I made it through last time around. Believe me, someday we'll meet again. Once out of the terminal, the first thing I noticed was Larry holding a sign with my name. After all these years, he hadn't changed a bit. I waved enthusiastically at him, but he didn't even look my way. I had to walk right up to him, grab the sign from him, and say with a smile, "Hey, what were you dreaming about? I've been calling you. You're Jason." He looked shocked. "How'd you grow so tall and handsome?" "I've always been handsome." Larry nodded excitedly. His eyes even looked a bit watery. Yes, of course you have." Then he looked behind me. "You came back alone? Where's the chairman, Madam, and Linda?" "They'll be back in a couple of days, once Linda's last show is done. You know how my parents are. They'd never miss their baby girl's performance." Larry clearly agreed. Yeah, every time the chairman calls, he can't stop talking about Linda. Always about how she performed in Vienna last month or how she's heading to the White House next. Sometimes I try to ask about you, but there's no room in the conversation. You'd think Linda was the biological child. I shook my head, amused. "Larry, you probably want to ask about Henry." Embarrassed to interrupt Dad. "Henry's Larry's son. 10 years ago he went to study in France, and he lived with us since then." Ugh, as if. I don't care about that rascal. Whenever he calls, it's just to ask for money. Larry grumbled. On the way back, I noticed the city's CBD had huge posters of Linda everywhere. The genius pianist is returning to perform for the first time in 14 years. It's a pretty good publicity stunt. The old house we used to live in got sold a long time ago. 3 years ago, my dad bought a villa on a hill in the suburbs. The view is amazing, and it just finished getting renovated last year. This is my first time stepping into this house. The renovation looks great, almost like the dream house I've always wanted. It was totally worth it. Linda and I drew over 100 sketches before the renovation to design the most comfortable home for our parents when they come back. Larry started his usual rambling. "Jason, why do you guys like living up so high on a mountain? The view is nice, sure, but you young folks need to drive carefully. These mountain roads twist and turn, and there's a cliff below. Don't drive fast." Got it. While soaking in the bath, I heard the phone ringing outside. I was so exhausted from the flight that I didn't want to move. But the person on the other end was persistent, ringing for almost 10 minutes. I had to get up and answer. "What are you doing?" A gentle and soothing voice spoke in my ear. I wrapped myself in a bathrobe and leaned lazily on the sofa. "Missy, I'm taking a bath. What's so urgent that you have to tell me now?" There was a brief silence. "I booked a flight for the day after tomorrow." Linda's voice sounded a bit weary, probably tired from all the practice recently. "All right, I'll make sure to welcome you home, Missy." A soft laugh came through the phone. "So, how was the performance?" "Not bad. Congrats. Okay, it's 11:30. Go to bed. You shouldn't stay up late." A light sigh drifted over my ear. "I know, good night." "Good night, love ya." There was a moment of silence before the other side continued. "What did you just say?" "Good night." The next part. "Love ya." Another moment of silence, like even breathing was paused. I chuckled. "What? Can't I say it? I heard your fans saying it at the airport last time." 3 seconds later, the dial tone buzzed in the phone. 2 days later, Larry picked up my parents from the airport, but Linda was nowhere to be seen. I heard she was picked up by the event organizers and might return in the evening. Oh well, I had specially asked the housekeeper to make a seafood feast, but it looks like she'll miss out. Just as we were about to eat, Ben the butler rushed over to say someone outside was asking for us. "For who?" I asked casually. "They said they're looking for the chairman and his wife." My parents exchanged puzzled glances. "Looking for us? Who?" Ben wore a conflicted expression but finally spilled the beans. "She says she's the chairman's daughter." After 16 years, I saw Nancy again. Her clothes weren't great but not too shabby either. At least they were clean. She was very dark and thin. Her rough skin and sallow complexion topped with simple hair, her hands covered in calluses, a bit like a lady cooking at a construction site. She trembled all over, her eyes fixed on my parents, lips quivering. "Dad, Mom, is it really you? Eric came over, eyes red and spirit excited. Sis, it can't be wrong, they're your real parents. My mom walked over in a daze, unblinking, and said slowly, Are you Nancy? Nancy's tears finally fell as she broke down crying. Mom, I'm Nancy. I'm Nancy. I kept reminding myself not to forget my real name so you'd recognize me in the future. Mom, I finally found you. My mom cried her heart out too, and even my usually strong dad couldn't hold back his tears. He stumbled toward Nancy and held her face. You really are Nancy, my daughter? Dad, Dad. The father and daughter embraced and cried. The room echoed with mournful cries. I wondered if I should muster up some tears too and create a tearful sibling reunion. But try as I might, not a single tear came out. Instead, I felt a strange sense of vindication. I recalled the day I was brought back in my previous life. Nancy wore a luxury Chanel dress with an arrogant look, just like those high society ladies on TV. She stood at the top of the stairs, looking down on me with a cold aloofness that screamed, Stay away. Dad, Mom, is he really Jason? You must be mistaken. Even after my dad confirmed it, annoyance lingered in Nancy's eyes. Eric, wearing a simple blue shirt and dark pants, walked over, displeased. Sis, is she really your brother? Looking at Eric's pouting face, Nancy couldn't help but smile as she messed with his hair like a puppy. Silly, you'll always be my only brother. I clutched my hands, nervously watching the two of them joking around. Even though I was standing in the living room, I felt like I was sinking into the ground. Thinking of the haughty and proud Nancy from back then and the plain-looking, sun-darkened lady in front of me now. She even looked 10 centimeters shorter than last time. I guess life's been hard without proper nutrition. Are you Jason? She finally noticed me after the cries ended. I smiled politely. I am. She walked over and studied me from head to toe, her gaze making me uncomfortable. Long time no see. Her tone was pretty cool. Yeah, it's been ages. It had been 16 years since we last parted. Fate sure has a mysterious way of working. Only, I did delay our reunion by a year, since school was a priority. Long time no see, sis. Nancy nodded, then seemed to remember something. Oh, by the way, Dad, Mom, let me introduce you to someone. This is my adopted brother, Eric. Wow, these two really have a special bond, the kind of sibling love. Of course, in their past life they were the riches duo, but in this life, they've become the tough time siblings duo. Without the tailored suits, Eric has lost his dashing and imposing look from the past. Now he's just a lanky guy with greasy hair and dark circles under his eyes, looking pretty sleazy. Even though his clothes are new, they look pretty cheap, like under $100 for the whole outfit. Even the security guard at our front door looks more dignified than him. When I shifted my gaze to him, Eric's face showed genuine embarrassment and awkwardness. There was also a glimpse of deep bitterness and hostility. Clearly, he hates me intensely, and it's not hard to see why. I'm the reason his life turned out so miserable and poor. He almost got adopted by my parents, after all. But whatever. His hate doesn't come close to how much I hated Nancy on the day she kidnapped me to the hospital to be his kidney donor. Those days, lying on the hospital bed, I felt like my life was a living hell. I hated Nancy, hated Eric, hated my mom and dad. I hated every single one of them. If I could have chosen, I would have wished us all to be wiped out together. But what good would that do? Absolutely none. After the surgery, my enemies recovered, and my family was all happy again. But I didn't heal well and got an infection, getting weaker and weaker. Eventually my kidneys failed, and I was gone within a couple of years. My parents clearly haven't realized that Eric was almost adopted by them as a kid. They politely thanked him for helping them find their daughter. They thanked him for taking care of Nancy over the years, even inviting him to stay. No effort comes without a reason. Eric going to all this trouble to find Nancy was all for this moment, wasn't it? Bet he spent these years looking for Nancy. After reuniting, we still have to follow procedures. Even though it's almost confirmed, Nancy volunteered for a DNA test, just in case. My dad didn't object. That whole afternoon, my mom sat on the couch holding Nancy, talking through tears. She asked about her life over the years and reminisced about Nancy's childhood. Like there was no end to the conversation. I caught bits and pieces. Nancy's adoptive father died when she was 11, and her adoptive mom raised her alone. Since they were poor, she only went to school until 7th grade, then went to work. She's collected trash, worked in factories, delivered packages, and cooked on construction sites. Quite a story. No idea how Eric found her. Hearing her daughter didn't finish middle school, Mom got teary-eyed. My dad just sat there, silent. As everyone sat in silence, we heard a noise from outside like a vehicle pulling in. Soon, footsteps echoed in the living room. A graceful girl pushing a simple suitcase walked in. "Hey Dad." "Mom, why are you all sitting here?" Megan took off her beret, revealing her stunning face in the light. She curiously looked at us on the couch. The daughter is back." Mom suddenly stood up, seeming a bit flustered. Dad looked a little rattled too. "Have you eaten? Are you hungry? Should we ask Mrs. Lee to make you a snack?" Mom unconsciously stepped away from Nancy and headed towards Linda, naturally showing concern. "Mom, I already ate." Linda smiled at her. "Who are these two?" She was obviously asking about Nancy and Eric. Mom looked nervous, unsure how to answer, and glanced at Dad. Dad hesitated, glanced at Nancy, then at Eric. "They're kids from a distant relative's family." Mom seemed relieved but guilty after hearing this. Awkwardly, she added, yes, kids from distant relatives." I sat casually in the armchair, watching as Nancy's already rough and yellowed face slowly turned pale. Linda nodded to the two on the couch as a greeting. Nancy stayed expressionless, not responding. Eric stared at Linda for a while, lost in thought. "Mom, I'm gonna take a shower upstairs." Hearing this, Mom quickly responded, Okay, honey, I'll go run your bath. You must be exhausted these days." "There's no need. You and Dad should chat with the guests for a bit." Linda nonchalantly directed me, "Jason, grab my luggage later." "Why me?" She gave me a look I understood to mean, "You figure it out." No reason. With Linda upstairs, the living room felt even quieter. Dad let out a long sigh and guiltily explained, "Sorry, Nancy. Linda has a really important performance next week. I didn't want to upset her, so I had no choice. But once it's over, I promise I'll tell her the truth. Right, Nancy, you won't be mad at us, will you?" Mom seemed to realize her earlier behavior was wrong and cautiously watched Nancy. But even if it happened again, she'd probably do the same thing. Parents, after all, prefer children who make them proud. Don't they? I've certainly learned that the hard way in my past life. Nancy's clenched fists slowly relaxed. Looking at Mom, the deep darkness in her eyes cleared. "Of course not, Mom, I understand." Hearing this, Mom seemed relieved. That's good. I silently mocked her innocence. Being robbed of your parents' love for 16 whole years by a stranger isn't something you just get over. Just like me in my past life, and Nancy in this life. 30 years on the East Bank, 30 years on the West. My dear sister, have you finally felt the heart-wrenching, helpless feeling yet? Hating someone but trying your best to please them just to not disappoint your folks. Even though they're your biological parents and siblings, you never quite feel like you're part of them. At the dining table, they're a family of 4, and you're just a random stranger. When guests at a party ask about you, your parents get all shifty and vague. Then there comes the handsome adopted son, confidently stepping in to cover for them. "Oh, he's the son of our nanny, looking for work in the city." How funny is that? I'm the biological child, but I'm introduced as the nanny's kid. Looking for work? Yeah, right. And nobody steps in to explain this nonsense. Not even my biological parents or sister. They all just go along with the lie. If it weren't for my childhood memories, I might actually believe I'm the nanny's kid. The next morning, I walk downstairs and see Linda at the table with a glass of milk. "Morning, sis." She chokes a bit, with a hint of a blush on her face. "What did you just call me?" I can't help but chuckle. "Are you aging too fast, sis? Is your hearing going bad?" Linda looks me over, staying calm. "Who's the one always saying weird things?" I shrugged. "Is calling you sister that weird?" Just when Linda is about to reply, Nancy and Eric come down the stairs. Morning. He greets both politely. Nancy nods, face cold and silent. But Eric gives Linda a friendly smile. Morning. Linda, always perceptive, quickly notices the unabashed hostility directed at her from the table. She feels a bit baffled. I clear my throat and throw in a line of French. Let me tell you something. Don't be too surprised. The three of them all turn to me. Nancy and Eric don't know French. At least they didn't in the past life. Judging by their looks this time, they probably still don't. Then I said casually, she's my long-lost sister, reunited with Mom and Dad yesterday afternoon. Linda looks surprised and instinctively replies in French. Why didn't you tell me the truth last night? You have a performance coming up. They didn't want it to divert your focus from practicing. She muses, that makes sense. What are you two talking about? Eric suddenly rudely cuts in. We were talking about how great this bread tastes. So why can't you say that in Chinese? Did this guy forget last time when he and Nancy took advantage of my poor English to mock my table manners? If I hadn't secretly recorded it on my phone and used a translation app, I'd probably never know how much animosity this adopted son has towards me. Such a double standard. I can speak Chinese or French whenever I want. What's it got to do with you? Eric's face turns from red to pale. He must be subconsciously slipping back into his original role from before. Eating at the same table and behaving like this, don't you think it's rude? Nancy's expression is icy. Another case of double standards. What a joke. So having a grumpy face is polite. Huh? This is my house, and I can have any expression I want. Nancy straightens up, her gaze sharp. Overnight, her attitude and presence have totally shifted from yesterday. Looks like we're gonna have some sibling rivalry. Before, I was cautious and never dared to go head-to-head with her. Until she dragged me to the hospital to forcibly remove my kidney for Eric. Then we broke all ties. But what did it matter? She didn't even blink when ordering the doctor to make the cut. Good, this time let's settle our scores. This is my house too, and I can say whatever I want, just too bad you can't understand. If it wasn't for you ditching me and running off to save your own skin, would I have ended up here? Nancy suddenly slaps the table, glaring at me fiercely. She finally says what's on her mind. You know how miserable I've been all these years. Where were you when the traffickers beat me half to death? Where were you when I fed pigs and chickens in the countryside? When I quit school at 12 to scavenge through trash in the streets, where were you? When I slept in a bridge hole, where were you? When a nail went through my foot at a construction site, where were you? Nancy ends up yelling, her emotions all over the place, spitting as she shouts. Breakfast is officially over. Even the table itself is now unusable, covered in spit. I wipe the spit off my wrist with a napkin, unimpressed. Nancy's further agitated by my gesture. She glares at me with bloodshot eyes. I just give a cold smile, like I'm the only one who's been beaten by traffickers, who hasn't fed pigs, who hasn't scavenged through trash or slept in a bridge hole. I was bounced around till I ended up in an orphanage. But my days there were even darker. Beaten with whips by the staff. Did I ever complain? What's going on? What are y'all arguing about? Father and mother walk in from outside, puzzled glances aimed at us. Nothing. Linda reacts first. We're just chatting. Mother gives a nervous look to the other side. Nancy, you didn't say anything you shouldn't have, right? In the heat of the moment, Nancy looks tense. Mom, who exactly is your real daughter? Huh? Can't I even speak the truth? You. Mother, lost for words, just stands there. After 3 seconds, she hurriedly explains to Linda. Linda, I'm sorry. I didn't intentionally keep things from you yesterday. Please don't be mad at Mom. In my heart, you'll always be the daughter I love the most. Even though I knew my mom always doted on Linda, hearing her say that right in front of her own daughter was surprisingly satisfying. Nancy looked at her mom, completely shocked. Her expression slowly changed from disbelief to disappointment, then despair, and finally utter silence. Meanwhile, Linda felt super awkward. Mom, I'm fine. You? She didn't even know what to say. Inside, she was probably thinking, go check on your real daughter. Linda quickly made an excuse to practice piano and left the scene in a hurry. After she left, Nancy calmly spoke up. Mom, Dad, when are you planning to make her leave? Her mother was momentarily confused. Make who leave? I'm your real daughter. Now that I'm back, you should get rid of any unnecessary people, right? You mean make Linda leave our home? Exactly, Nancy said plainly. Absolutely not, both parents said in unison. Her mom looked at Nancy like she was talking nonsense. How has Linda ever wronged you to make you want her out on your second day back home? Nancy sneered. Mom, I'm your birth daughter. I've suffered and been through hell all these years without any of your care and love. Now that I'm finally back, I still have to put up with this fake daughter. Have you thought about me? Her mother's eyebrows furrowed, and her face turned unhappy. We know you've had a tough time out there, and we'll make it up to you. But it's not Linda's fault. You can't blame her for it. Nancy was speechless for a moment. It was clear she was really disappointed in her mom. Dad, do you think so too? Her dad looked at his real daughter, a hint of guilt in his eyes, but his tone was firm. Nancy, your mom is right. You've been through a lot and we do owe you. We hope to make it up to you, but Linda isn't to blame. We won't ask Linda to leave, and we hope you two can get along. Make it up to me? Nancy let out a cold laugh, like she'd heard the biggest joke. How do you plan to make it up to me? With money? Don't forget that the money was always mine. The entire A group is mine because I'm your real daughter. How many times do I have to say that? If you want to make it up to me, unless you can turn back time, go back 16 years, can you? Can you? Nancy's hysterical screams echoed in the living room. In her fury, she flipped the dining table, sending cups and plates crashing to the floor. She did what I always wanted to do in my past life. She said what I wanted to say. Yeah, parents always talk about making up for things. But can they really make up for lost time? It's the carefree childhood and precious youth that we missed out on. But in my past life, when my parents asked me to get along with Eric, Nancy was right there making snide comments. You'll never take Eric's place. He'll always be my only brother. If it weren't for our blood relationship, I'd have been kicked out long ago. In the end, she forced me to give Eric a kidney. I asked her why she'd do this to me. After all, I was his real younger brother. Because you're just unlucky, you have no luck to live with us, she replied. It's easy to talk big unless you're in someone else's shoes. Nancy, it's your own bad luck you don't have the blessing to stay in this family. After that day, a clear rift grew between Nancy and her parents. Both sides seemed to avoid each other, clearly not willing to compromise. One side insisted on kicking Linda out. The other side was absolutely against it. From my view, Nancy was way too confident. So what if she's the real daughter? Linda brought endless glory to her parents, making them look like star parents, admired and respected by many. How could they give up on their well-nurtured, famous pianist foster daughter for a middle school dropout who collected garbage in the past? They're not stupid. 2 days later, Dad approached Nancy in the living room, suggesting they hire some tutors to help her catch up before sending her to study abroad. Nancy couldn't believe her ears. You're trying to kick me out? Of course not. Dad couldn't understand why she was twisting his words. Nancy, before, you didn't have the chance to study. It's different now. You're young, and you should learn more, see more of the world to broaden your perspective. Why should I change my perspective? I don't need to study abroad. In a couple of days, I can start working at the company with you. You just need to teach me how to run and manage a group. Her father's silence showed he was shocked by her words. I kindly reminded her from the side, Sis, Dad's health isn't great these past 2 years, so I'm mainly in charge of a group's decisions now. Nancy's face instantly changed, and she shot up from her seat. Why? Why what? Jason, how much are you planning to take from me? I couldn't help but chuckle. When did a group become yours? I'm the eldest daughter, so it's originally mine. Nancy argued loudly like a firecracker. So what if you're the eldest? A group belongs to Dad, and it's not your turn yet to say it's yours. I said it's mine, so it is. You guys owe it to me. You must compensate me, she snapped delusionally. Enough was enough, and Dad finally lost his temper. How do you expect to manage the company? Are you daydreaming? If you want to join a group, at least graduate from Stanford Business School like your brother did. Do you have that capability, middle school dropout? By the time you get into Stanford, that opportunity will be gone. When Mom and Eric heard the commotion, they rushed over. The living room fell silent. Nancy stared at her father, her eyes filled with resentment and humiliation. She glared at him, almost bursting with fury. I'm your real daughter. You lost me and now you're rejecting me. So what if I'm just a cook? I'm your real daughter, and the one playing the piano is the one you adopted from the orphanage. Are you seriously losing it? Ignoring your biological daughter and kissing up to the piano player every day. I think you both have lost your minds. A loud slap landed on Nancy's face. Her father trembled with anger. Get out. Just get out. It was a chaotic day. Nancy, of course, didn't leave. She couldn't bring herself to. The father-daughter relationship hit rock bottom. Even her mother was colder towards Nancy since she was also insulted. Plus, with Linda's first performance in the country coming up, she had less attention for her biological daughter. On Friday afternoon, her parents were dressed up early, ready to hit the concert hall. Linda had reserved front row seats for us. She had invited Nancy and Eric to the performance out of courtesy a couple of days ago. But till 4 p.m., Nancy stayed locked in her room. Eric, however, dressed to the nines, followed us to the car. The performance was, unsurprisingly, a hit. It was a full house. After thunderous applause, we went backstage to see Linda, who was swarmed by reporters. Once they found out who we were, they started snapping pictures and bombarding us with questions. Luckily, my parents were pros at handling such situations, posing calmly for the cameras. At first, Eric was a bit awkward, but he quickly adapted. After all, in his past life as the heir to Group A, he was used to cameras. Most reporters knew my parents. Some even knew me, but no one recognized Eric. Some were quick to guess his relationship with Linda, subtly probing if he was her boyfriend. Eric just smiled and dodged the questions skillfully. A well-known TV station wanted my parents for an interview show. They wanted to explore how a genius pianist is nurtured from the parents' perspective. So they weren't there at the moment. No one was to slap Eric. I just quietly watched him from the sidelines. The next day, Linda's relationship status buzzed on social media. Eric's not-so-striking face was on screen. Fans couldn't believe it but couldn't explain why he was backstage with Linda's family. Linda's Facebook was flooded. Woo-woo. Does the goddess have bad taste? She should date me. I stayed up all night wondering where I went wrong. Eric became noticeably more attentive to Linda after that day. He'd join her for breakfast every morning and quietly took milk from the nanny to her room at night. They'd discuss piano and violin together. In his past life, Eric played the violin. He wasn't exceptionally talented and didn't practice much, but he was good enough to impress. Linda had also played a bit as a kid, so Eric would often humbly ask for her guidance with the violin. While he remained unembarrassed, I felt second-hand embarrassment for him. That night, Eric came upstairs with milk. Without a word, I drank it all. His face was grim. It wasn't for you. I know. I did it to warn you, don't waste your time. Linda's out of your league. He chuckled at my comment, direct and taunting. And how do you know she's out of my league? She's just a woman. Where does he get this confidence from? Since he didn't believe it, we decided to test it out. While he watched, I knocked on Linda's door, leaving it ajar on purpose. She had just showered, wearing a robe, her damp, curly hair dripping. She asked me, "What's up?" I suddenly didn't know what to say, standing there dumbfounded for a moment. "Want me to dry your hair for you?" She gave me a weird look. "You came here just to dry my hair?" "Fine, forget it." I shrugged. "Wait." She stopped me, her eyes moving slightly. "The hairdryer is in the bathroom." "Bathroom?" "Forget it. I'll dry it for you first, sit down." I patted the sofa. Linda glanced at me oddly, a certain emotion on her face, but she sat obediently. To clear my mind, I randomly rubbed her head with the towel. "Jason, are you doing this on purpose?" Linda smacked my hands angrily. I grasped her soft wrist. Our eyes met. "How did I upset you?" Her hands caught in mine, her eyes turned fierce like a little wolf. showing signs of getting annoyed. I hadn't seen this side of Linda for a while. In our past life, it was frequent. Remembering her fighting with those rowdy kids at the orphanage or how passionate she looked while playing the piano, it was hard to believe they were the same person. "You didn't upset me, but I'm gonna upset you," I said and immediately kissed her. Linda seemed taken aback, but after a brief pause, she responded. The two of us kissed passionately on the sofa. As we paused to catch our breaths, she looked at me seriously. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I seemed to be addicted to her lips, nodding quickly, "Yes, I'm sure." Linda chuckled lightly, playfully. "I was just going to ask why your mouth tastes like milk." I heard footsteps outside the door, slowly fading away. After I claimed Linda's territory in front of Eric, he backed off a bit. I thought he had given up, but he was just waiting to play his trump card later. Weekend. I had to fly to Germany for business. My parents were scheduled to tape a follow-up interview show on those days. At home, it was only Linda, Nancy, and Eric. I took a 2 p.m. flight home, arriving at around 1 a.m. Walking past the third floor, I noticed Linda's bedroom door was open. As soon as I stepped inside, someone flipped on the light. Eric was lying shirtless on the bed, giving me a mocking grin. Linda was quietly asleep next to him. "You're back. We've been waiting for you." Hearing him say "we," I noticed Nancy on the couch. Fury surged through my head, and I barely stopped myself from kicking Eric. "What did you do?" Nancy looked at me nonchalantly and tossed an iPad onto the coffee table. I picked it up and opened the gallery. It was full of different photos of Eric and Linda on the bed, in the car, and in the bathroom. The angles were sneakily shot, making it look like Linda was either asleep or enjoying herself. I dropped the iPad and walked to the bed, softly calling Linda. No response. I couldn't believe Nancy and Eric had stooped so low. "What do you want?" "Linda's career plus half of a group's rights." $2 billion doesn't seem like too much, Eric said casually. I turned to Nancy. "Is it about money for you too?" She looked me in the eye. "What else?" "I can't decide on this without calling Dad first." I quickly briefed the situation over the phone. My parents were staying at a 5-star hotel about 40 minutes away, near the TV station. They arrived quickly. Mom rushed to the bed to call Linda, who still didn't move. When Mom saw Eric in nothing but a bathrobe, she almost passed out from anger. Before anyone could react, she'd slapped Eric twice. "What did you do to Linda? How did you get these photos?" Eric looked at her in disbelief, stunned by what just happened. "Mom, did you hit me? You good for nothing, who gave you the nerve to mess with my daughter?" Eric's face fell. "Did you just insult me?" "No manners, I did. You're not even worthy to lick my daughter's shoes." Your daughter. She's not your daughter. Nancy and I are your real kids, you fool." Eric shouted. "Are you nuts?" Mom shot back at him, exasperated. "Yeah, I've lost my mind. If you don't cough up $2 billion in 3 days, every video and photo will go public." Mom tried to slap Nancy but was pushed back. I walked over and stopped her. "Mom, Dad, you go. I'll deal with them." Dad gave me a long look, then dragged my furious mom out. I opened the iPad, scrolling through the photos calmly. "Not even $20, let alone $2 billion, I said. Eric sneered. "Jason, I want to see how far your stubbornness goes. Eric, in our past life, you might have had a chance with Linda. But now, don't you have any self-awareness?" Eric's eyes widened as if he'd seen a ghost. Staring at me, he stammered, "Jason, you were reborn too, right?" I smirked coolly, not responding. Nancy looked between us, thinking she misheard. "No wonder you ended up with Linda back then." Eric glared, consumed with hate. "At the orphanage, you made sure Mom and Dad wouldn't adopt me, right?" I shook my head. "Not just that. I convinced Mom to move us to Germany, told Dad to sell the old house, and suggested he transfer Larry to a branch up north. I wanted to sever your ties to our family completely." "You bastard," Eric snapped, throwing a punch, but I caught his wrist firmly. "Thanks for the compliment. I dealt with Nancy, why not you?" Nancy seemed to realize something, her expression darkening. "Jason, what do you mean?" But Eric already knew. "It was you who set her up to be taken by traffickers." "Wrong," I said. "I just chose self-preservation." "Jason, Nancy's face twisted with rage. She lunged at me, hands around my neck, eyes flaming red. I suspected it was you all along. You stood by and let it happen, and I've lived worse than a dog because of you. I pried her hands off and pushed her back. You deserved it because you're a beast. I saved you once. And how did you repay me? You're heartless. Do you know how happy I am when I hear about your pathetic life? I want to throw a party. Nancy, karma's hitting you now. You think I'm happy? This life, you're so short you can't even stand taller than a pumpkin. Eric, you've been looking for her all these years. Huh? And yet, it was all for nothing. This lifetime's Nancy isn't going anywhere anyway. She's better off cooking on a construction site. Eric gritted his teeth in frustration. So what? At least I won this last time. I won in the previous life. Yeah, you did, but that was in another lifetime. Right now, you're broke with nothing to your name. Hope you can afford a kidney transplant when your kidney disease comes back. Eric burst into a manic laugh. Why would I be broke? I'm about to get 2 billion, aren't I? You don't want to see Linda's career ruined, do you? Or do you want to watch a group go bankrupt? I didn't argue, just pulled out the surveillance of Linda's room and the garage downstairs on my phone. In the footage, Eric and Nancy were helping a barely conscious Linda into the car, snapping photos frantically. After a while, they carried her into the elevator, took her to a room on the 3rd floor, and repeated the setup. Coming back and seeing these two greedy and foolish individuals again, I remembered your request. 2 billion, right? Sorry, I don't have 2 billion, but I'll make sure the judge gives you 20 years instead. Though realistically, not likely. You didn't kill anyone or burn anything. 3 to 5 years max and you'll be out. But I'll make sure you two leave here like stray dogs. Not a penny to your name. And I'll make sure you get a taste of jail food as well. Eric and Nancy didn't see the tables turning so fast. Their faces were priceless, as if they were about to cry from their own stupidity. Why is this happening? Why? Eric looked up at me, eyes full of spite. You're pushing me, Jason. We can both die together. I can't live long without money anyway. He lunged at me, punching me in the face. I barely had time to react before he hit me again. Why? Jason, it's all because of you. I'm in this mess. Do you know how long I searched for Nancy? 14 years. 14 whole years. I endured so much only to end up like this. Fine, I won't live anymore. Let's all just go down together. Jason, you're going down with me. Eric went mad, throwing punch after punch. Then he dragged me towards the balcony. Eric. Nancy called out to him. Eric, crazed, pulled me towards the open balcony. The railing was low, barely waist high. A moment's carelessness, and we'd both fall over. Eric was totally unhinged. I clung tightly to the railing, trying to keep my body steady. To avoid dying with him, I had to compromise. Eric, there's $5 million in my room. Take it and go, but promise me you'll never come back. The madness in his movements stopped abruptly. What did you say? If you promise never to return, I'll choose not to call the cops. The $5 million is yours. It'll cover future surgeries just fine. Nancy heard it too. She seemed almost insulted by the offer. $5 million? Are you out of your mind? Greed knows no bounds. That's all the cash I have. Take it or leave it, up to you. Eric slowly calmed down. How do I know you'll keep your word? What if you call the cops the moment we leave? I can give you the money in front of my parents. As long as you never return, I won't release the surveillance footage. As for calling the police, Nancy is still my parents' child. They're disappointed in her but wouldn't go that far. Perhaps seeing the logic, Eric released me. All right, as you say. Nancy and Eric dragged 2 hefty bags of cash down to the parking garage. Like I said, my parents were too weary to say goodbye to her. Eric opted for his favorite car, a Lamborghini. These cars were ordered abroad by Linda and me, shipped back not long ago. After so many years, Eric was elated to sit in his favorite car again. Just as Nancy was about to load the bags into the car, Eric changed his mind. Wait, let's take this Porsche instead. With a smug grin, he looked at me. I had to hand over a different set of keys. As the car roared to life, Eric smiled knowingly. Jason, we'll take your $5 million, but who knows how long that will last, right? Feigning shock, I stared at him. A storm of frustration, anger, and regret welled up in my eyes. But all I could do was glare helplessly. With a triumphant grin, Eric sped away. I composed myself and took the elevator back to the 3rd floor, overlooking the winding hillside road. Larry's words echoed in my ear. Funny, Master Jason, why do you prefer living high up in the mountains? Yeah, the view's great, but you young folks ought to be careful driving. No joke here, the road's right next to a sheer cliff. Larry wasn't wrong. I don't like living high up here at all. Too many mosquitoes, too humid. But above all, that winding road really is terrifying. The drop beside it even more so. I've often thought, what if the car suddenly lost control on that road? It'd be curtains for sure. Yet somehow I was dead set on buying a house here. Even snuck back to the country to do it. After all, I searched for a long time to find a place that fits my vision. Nancy, Eric, I've put a lot of thought into finding this prime location for you. Lost in thought. Under the heavy night sky, the car with its lights on started to swerve. I could almost hear a piercing scream cut through the night sky. In less than 2 seconds, there was a loud crash. The car broke through the guardrail and plunged straight down the cliff. Better sell the house next month. I don't want to stay there another day. By the time the police notified us to get to the hospital, Eric was already gone. Nancy was in the ER. That was a bit of a shock to me. I didn't think her luck was that strong. We stayed at the hospital all day and night. I was worried since my parents are getting older and might not hold up, so I had the driver take them home to rest, then come back at night to relieve me. Turns out that was a smart decision. Not long after they left, the doctor told me Nancy was awake. But the chances weren't great, and it was best to let my folks come and say goodbye. Are you kidding? No way. I walked into the ward. Nancy was badly injured. I heard a tree branch went through the windshield and straight through her body and the passenger seat. What a resilient branch. I tried not to look below her neck. Didn't want to leave a mental scar on myself. Say what you want to, I'll pass it on to our parents. But it'd be best to avoid sensitive subjects like you thinking I tampered with the car or whatever. I want to see Mom and Dad. Nancy managed a few weak words. Larry drove them home, they won't be back for a while. A look of despair flitted across Nancy's face. It was the kind of despair right before the end. Her face suddenly turned ashen. Slowly, she spoke again. Jason, this lifetime you must feel proud, right? What do you mean? I looked at her suspiciously. You remembered things from your past life? Despite how weak Nancy was, her eyes had that arrogance I was familiar with. That self-important vibe pushing people away. That was definitely the Nancy from the past life. Last night's crash, was it you? Nancy spoke as blood trickled from her mouth. Looks like she not only regained past memories but also got a bit smarter this round. Good thing there weren't cameras in the room, so I might as well level with you. Yep. Trading our lives, Linda's and mine from the last life, for yours and Eric's this life. Seems fair, right? I don't have many virtues, but holding grudges is one of them. Nancy stared at me, her lips trembling. Hate me, go ahead. My big grudge is finally avenged. I'm thrilled. When were you reborn? I swear I never spoke so seriously in this life. The day with the traffickers, remember? When that old lady nabbed you, I even waved bye-bye. I told you, see you in 15 years, but too far away, might not have heard. Nancy coughed violently, blood spilling. I shook my head, continued my rant, and I even knew where you were sold as a kid. When you told them last time, I guessed it. Nancy, actually, all those years I knew where you were, just didn't want to bring you back. 'Cause I told you 15 years, couldn't advance it. Nancy coughed harder, the blood just kept coming. Her trembling finger pointed at me, consciousness fading. You're ruthless. Am I? Of course. Can't get revenge any other way. Last life, when I found out you hit Linda, I vowed to become a demon, to take your lives, yours and Eric's. At Nancy's burial, Mom sobbed uncontrollably. Dad seemed to age overnight. Who'd imagine? A newly reunited daughter, ending like this. It's all right, grief's temporary. In time, when the sadness fades, they'll go back to peaceful lives. Last life it was me, this life it was Nancy. Doesn't affect them much. Folks were fair, not playing favorites. Though I hated them a bit, life's just like that. At least this life they got Linda. The one I love gets to grow up safe and sound, no turmoil like that last life. And became the brightest star around. For that, I'm willing to make peace. Linda spent a few days in the hospital thanks to hallucinogens and sedatives from Eric and Nancy. Sunday, the driver brought her home. The house was quiet, 7th day since Nancy passed, parents went to the temple. Scrolling my phone, thinking when to list the house. This month or next. How are you doing? Linda came over looking a bit worried. I nodded. She paused. A moment later, hugged me gently, with a soft tone. Cry if you need to, really cry, no need to hold back. I put down my phone, feeling baffled. Why would I cry? Linda let go, gave me a curious glance. You sure you're okay? My relationship with Nancy isn't as good as you might think. We haven't seen each other in years. We're like strangers now. Especially considering what she and Eric did to you. Linda seemed to remember something. Those photos. No worries, I've already taken care of it. Just the thought of her and Eric lying in the same bed makes me want to kick Eric's gravestone. How could you be so caught off guard by others? Even at home, you should be on alert. She was speechless. Do you hear what you're saying? Luckily, nothing serious happened, or I'd be sick to my stomach. Auntie's off today, so no one's cooking at home. Let's go out and buy some groceries to cook ourselves. Now? Yeah, I'll call a ride online. She seemed puzzled. Why not drive out? I paused my fingers on the screen for a moment. Don't use the car at home for a while. I'll have someone look at it in a few days. Why? Such a curious cat. I rubbed her forehead. No reason, just a secret.